Right, Mr. Palmer here, going to do this GCSE computing video on hosting and the cloud. Okay, so basically the big questions for this video: what are hosting and cloud computing? So you should have some definitions for those two different things. You've got to look at what services we would actually get from, what services do we use with regards to cloud computing, and then what are the benefits and the risks of using cloud computing to an organization. So the first one we're going to kick off with actually are what are hosting and cloud computing. So this is a little diagram of hosting. You can see, if you try to pick it apart, we've got a machine at home, which is a client. We know about this. We've got a server on the other side. This server, in this case, we're going to call a host because it's hosting web. You can see it's hosting several different websites on that server. Okay, so we're thinking about what's going on in that diagram. Basically, we've got a host, which is a network node, and it may provide data and services to other nodes. Then we've got the actual hosting itself, which is where we're using a network node to provide those services. For example, in the previous screen, we saw that the host was serving web pages to a requester. Okay, so there are different nodes connected to a network. If you look at that list of nodes at the bottom, all right, probably worth hitting pause in a second and just trying to identify whether each of those things is going to be a node or a host on a network. And I'm assuming you hit play again, and you should have got something like this. So all of the devices on the left, right, they're all just plain nodes on the network, just devices connected to a network. On the right hand side, we have devices that are connected to the network, but they may be providing services to other nodes on the network itself. Okay, now client, if you remember when we were talking about in class, clients don't usually provide services to other nodes on the network, but the reason why they come under the definition of a host is to do with something back in the day. Okay, and basically when we used to have these big mainframe computers where we had network operating systems and people were using dumb terminals, the server was the host, because the server had its own IP address and it was doing other bits and pieces. All right, now basically any later definition classified any general purpose computer that was connected to the network for resource sharing as a host. So if your computer has its own IP address connected to a network, it's classed as a host. But what we're really looking at in this case is, when we're talking about hosts, are nodes on the network that are providing services to other nodes on the network. So I'm going to put these three questions on the board. Right, I want you to think about them on the board. Sorry, on the screen. I want you to think about them for a minute. Okay, and I want to decide whether they are true or false. Okay. And the first one, okay, are all nodes are hosts? That's obviously false, because you have nodes on the network that, so switches, bridges, routers, etc. They are not hosts because they're not providing those services to other nodes. However, all hosts are nodes. Okay, all nodes provide data and services, so that's false, and a host may provide data and services to other hosts. All right, that's true. So what examples have you got of hosts providing services to other hosts? You've got DNS. So for example, if the first server doesn't know, it will go up to the next level to try and find out the IP address of a URL, and go up to the next level, etc., to the top level to try and determine the IP address of a particular URL. Then in the client server model, we've got lots of client servers, okay, which are hosts providing services to other hosts. Right. So the second question, why we want to use cloud computing services? So take a look at this little diagram. You can see we got different devices, okay, it's different nodes connected, hosts connected to the network, and they may be connected through a cloud to use different services. So you can see in there icons: Dropbox, Google Drive, G Suite, Netflix. Okay, you may not know what SAP is. It's worth just open up a new tab and doing a bit of research and having a look at what that is. So basically you can see you've got different kinds of cloud services. I've got four main categories up here: hosting data, so we use Google Drive, you might use Office 365, Dropbox, etc. All right, YouTube and Netflix literally are still just hosting data because they have videos, all right, which are just data, which are then shared with other people. We've got applications like G Suite, SAP, Sage. You might look up what SAP, SAP, and Sage do. They're big applications used by companies, and companies will store their data on SAP and Sage servers, and then they will use a web interface to access that data and process it. All right. Then you've got data processing. So you may use, you may have a website, and you may do stuff via a website, and actually all your data is processed on Amazon, so that's AWS, Amazon Web Services, or might be processed using IBM Watson's artificial intelligence engine, etc. And then we've got different kinds of cloud services like email. For example, if you use Gmail, Outlook.com, remote desktops, gaming. So if you might write an MMORPG and then you don't have the money to pay for your own cloud servers to host that, but you can actually get another company to host your game for you. All right. So if we think about actually going back to that big question, what is the first big question? What is cloud computing? Well, the cloud is a network of servers that are providing different functions for us. But the cloud computing is internet-based computing that's using that shared processing on that network of servers that actually provide data and resources to devices as they need those services. Obviously, by talking about internet-based computing, we're talking about using internet technologies such as IP, using web technologies, etc. Now, what are the risks of cloud computing? Basically, what you should be able to do is to put together a big mind map, okay, about cloud computing. You might want to put it in a table, risks versus benefits. The choice is yours. What we're thinking though is about taxonomies of knowledge, all right? So you should be able to classify the information on here in levels, all right? So the first thing we obviously looked at are services, and those are like 3 of the services that you might put onto your mind map, and then you'll be able to branch off with that with a second level of information. So these are the different factors that we're going to talk about when we refer to the factors that are affecting the use of cloud computing. I'm not going to read them out because that'd be quite boring. So the first one is cost, all right? So is cost a risk or a benefit of cloud computing? Well, if you're thinking about using Google Drive to host your files as opposed to buying your own server to host your files, then you probably realize it's the benefit because it's cheaper. You don't need to pay for any kind of server infrastructure. It also is a benefit because the software cost is going to be lower or possibly even free, because now I'm not buying a Windows server license. I'm not buying other software licenses for web services, etc. Okay, so if I go back to my mind map, the second level of knowledge coming off, so the first level of knowledge coming off benefits is going to be cost. From cost, I can branch off to the second level there, which is it's going to be cheaper, and then you can fill in any other detail going down into actually when it's cheaper than hosting a server, you don't have any purchase cost. You also don't have any running costs because you're not paying for specialist employees to maintain it. You're not paying for electricity. You're not paying for maintenance costs to replace components, etc. All right. You can literally see that this would kind of be your essay template. All right. If you're writing an essay, because this would be your point that you were going to mention over here, and then you'll be able to expand on it by talking about these things down here and applying it to the scenario. All right. So it's quite important that you understand the levels of knowledge because it directly relates to writing an essay. Availability of services in the cloud, is that a risk or a benefit? Well, it goes under the risk section because basically you need an internet connection. If you don't have an internet connection, then you can't access those cloud services. So if you think about if you backed up all your photos on Google Photos and you're abroad on holiday, you haven't got roaming data, then you're not going to be able to access your photos. Whereas if you had all your photos saved on your SD card, you'd be able to see them. Security, risk or benefit? It's a risk. Data held in the cloud can be prone to security breaches. We don't hold the data on our own server, so we don't know who's in charge of that data, who's going to be looking at the data. There could be other companies' data all being held on the same server. There could be a conflict of permissions, etc. Right? We actually don't know what's going on over there. On the flip side, someone might say that actually companies like Google and Microsoft have got more expertise in terms of setting up servers and ensuring that the systems are secure than perhaps an in-house team. In terms of performance now, whether you local performance on your own server versus remote performance in the cloud, it's a risk. Basically, it's going to depend upon the quality of your internet connection. It's going to depend upon the load on the provider server. We've all been there where we want to use some kind of web service and it all seems to be really, really slow. And it's because whoever it is that we're watching, it could be watching film on Netflix and it's peak time on a Friday evening and everything just seems really slow because, the load is just too high. Versions of software is a benefit. Reason for this is I don't ever need to upgrade my Google Docs, Google G Suite, all right? It's just handled by Google, so I know that I'm always going to have the latest version. That also then impacts the next point, which is that all users are going to have the same version, therefore we don't have any problems with compatibility. So for example, if I have using Office 2016 or something like that, and I send a document to someone who's using Office 2010 and they try to run my PowerPoint, some of the animations might not work, okay, or the video might not work properly, etc., because we've got a compatibility problem between different versions of the software. In terms of reliability and backup, Benefit, basically, a big company is going to have a quality backup program. If you think about yourself at home, when was the last time you backed up your important files? Maybe weeks and weeks ago, could be months ago, could be a year ago. Whereas we are part of the service contract is that cloud provider is going to have a regular backup program in place. In terms of server failure, here is a benefit. If you think about this diagram, well, it's a bit out of proportion, but basically on the left hand side, if our server went down, then none of our services would be available until we manage to get that server back up. In the cloud, if one server goes down, they will make use of failover and automatically switch your services over to another server in their farm. So your services will still be available while they repair that server that's out of order. Platform independence is a benefit, right? All you need is a browser to access your service. You might need some plugins, you might need Flash, which is also out of date now, but you might need JavaScript or Java or whatever it is, okay, in order to run the services in the cloud. So you don't need any other specialist software. So that's why you can access your applications on a tablet, on iOS, on Mac OS, on Windows, on Android, whatever it is. Okay. In terms of functionality, this is going to be a risk. If you think about using G Suite or Office 365, it has less functionality in that software application compared to the actual program that you have installed on the desktop. So sometimes you may want to do something and you can't in the cloud. Although we know that this is changing over time, so who knows, in 2 years' time this point may be a moot point and no longer relevant. So you should be able to answer these 3 questions now. Understanding basically what hosting is and what cloud computing is, and so the relationship between hosting and cloud computing. And then you should know some off the top of your head, some basic services that are provided using cloud computing, some examples, and you should be able to explain the risks and the benefits of using cloud computing.